I was so excited to get my now extracted teeth and keep them as a souvenir. The nurse said I couldn't. Anesthesiologists have Reddit. What is something you won't forget hearing from someone who was under anesthesia? I am the patient's relative, not the anesthesiologist, but as he started going under, the patient, a hydraulics engineer, started trying to tell the doctor what type of pump they should install to fix the busted blood vessel in his brain.
Somebody replied,
I'm a hobbyist mechanic and a huge gearhead, and while falling asleep I have caught myself wondering how big of an engine I could swap into my car. I was recently under for abdominal surgery. My partner of 17 years who I dearly love was the first face I remember seeing when coming out of anesthesia. I looked at him and said, "Who the hell are you and why are you staring at me?" He's still laughing. I was 17 at the time and got my wisdom teeth taken out. Everything went as planned, but I woke up and remember seeing the oral surgeon. Me, being dosed with grade A giggle juice and having no idea what I was doing, asked her if she would like to grab boba sometime. I've never been so embarrassed in my life. 5 years later, she let me shadow for part of my dental school shadowing requirement and is giving me a tour for applications next cycle. Not a boba date, but all things considered, she was a great mentor and I'm glad I made that mistake. My son, who was then about 10, was coming to after being given anesthesia for his broken wrist. They had to do traction to get everything aligned. There were quite a few people in the room, but his drugged self directed all his attention to me. He was describing Big Daddy from BioShock and kept repeating, "Dad, you know what I'm talking about." Because I couldn't think of the name of the game at the time. Then he got frustrated and yelled at me, "You son of a dog." Lots of laughs from the hospital staff. My husband had his knee ligament and meniscus repaired. When they brought him back into the room, he stared at me through half-closed eyes until the nurses left and then said, "I love you. I'm glad you're here." I melted. Then he conked back out for about half an hour and woke up with a big gasp. I thought he was in pain, that's how loud it was, and went, "Burger King burger." I said, "You want a Burger King burger?" He said, "I do." So I had to get him a Burger King burger for dinner. He doesn't remember anything until he was back home several hours later with Burger King sitting in front of him. As a 17-year-old, I had a colonoscopy because the doctors couldn't figure out why I couldn't go poop. I mention this as an important detail, because after the colonoscopy I was still very much under the anesthesia effects, loopy, and when my mom tried to offer saltines I started screaming, "How many calories do those things have?" My mom starts panicking like, "Calm down, lower your voice, people are gonna think you have an eating disorder or something," and I just said, "I can't talk quiet, what's going on?" The ironic thing was, I guess besides disculating my ability to control vocal volume, the anesthesia kind of acted like a truth serum in a way. No one found out I had an eating disorder until I almost died from it a year later, but I can't believe that wasn't taken into consideration as to why I couldn't go to the bathroom. Can't poop if you don't eat. I was under anesthesia to get my wisdom teeth removed. When I was slowly waking up, I heard the nurses talking about Hakeem Olajuwon. I started talking about which Rockets I knew. How I knew Rudy T. They're all like, "Yeah, you do, okay." My girlfriend is sitting there laughing with them, playing along as if I'm so high and talking out my butt. In reality, I was a bartender at a place where they would frequent. I knew all those guys. And my girlfriend knew I knew them. She just thought the whole situation was so funny though, that she didn't just say something like, "No, he's serious, it's true." I have had to get colonoscopies every couple years since I was 24, so I've gone under quite a bit for someone my age. Every time, when I wake up, I'm crying, and a nurse is comforting me. They say I don't tell them why I'm upset, but I'm weeping every damn time. It has gotten to the point where I warn the nurses I'll be sobbing, but to not take it too seriously. After talking with the nurses I have learned that this is very common, and apparently I'm very lucky to not be vomiting alongside the weeping. As a reminder, please do not delay if you have colon cancer in your family or you are 45 or older. It's not fun, but it ain't that bad, and it can save your life. Schedule it now. This is your sign, do it. One time, when I was a male biology student in my early 20s and had a stuck kidney stone, I was being put under for surgery. Just as the anesthesiologist was pushing MEDS and telling me to count back from 100, I looked up at him in a drugged but focused gaze and said, "You're so pretty, you could be in movies." Then blackness. The anesthesiologist was like a grizzled 70-year-old hunchback-looking guy with a lopsided grimace and more ear hair than head hair. Great doc though. The very last thing I remember hearing was the nurses cracking up laughing. It was a smallish medical community and I knew some of the people there, so as a joke somebody snuck his headshot into my chart. I like to think it was him gunning for a second career though.
Somebody replied.
I had a similar experience during my first tympanoplasty. The surgeon was really attractive. I was a teenage girl. I jokingly called him Dr. A. Hunker to my mom during one of the pre-surgery appointments. It rhymed with his actual surname. Apparently one of the nurses overheard me. She literally waited until I was high as hell and waiting to be put under, and then asked me, "Hey, can I tell the other nurses what you called the doctor?" She didn't even have to tell them because I blurted out, "Yeah, he's super cute. Dr. A. Hunker," before passing out. I'm sure the anesthesiologist who did my son's dental surgery will never forget him. Specifically, because he came out after the fact clearly trying very hard not to laugh to tell my wife about it. Kiddo was just chatting away while he was getting ready. Now my son is autistic and at the time had a very distinct way of speaking and pattern of emphasis along with a lisp. I literally cannot translate how he sounded talking into text. Anyway, just as they're getting ready to put him under, he goes, "You're gonna need some hardcore nighttime medicine cues. I have ADHD," and out, practically snoring even. They get to work, finish up and pull the mask off him. The literal second the mask was off his nose, he bolts upright and finishes his sentence from however long earlier. That stuff don't work good on me. I had a colonoscopy last month and woke up rested and totally lucid. Bummer. However, when my husband had his vasectomy after our son was born, they gave him a local, it's an outpatient procedure, and some Valium and pain medication after. He was loopy. I stopped at Algreen's to fill his prescription, and he said, as he lolled in the passenger seat with the ice pack on his genitals, "Hey, will you get me a Coke?" I nod. "And some Doritos?" I nod again and go to leave car. "And some Oreos? And some Reese's Cups? And some Twizzlers?" We were 38, well behind junk food years, not stoners, and he was 6'2" and 170, not obese or a binge eater. I said, "Are you serious?" And he grinned drunkenly and said, "Yeah." I grabbed the baby carrier and said, "I'm taking the baby with me." He literally did finger guns. This man is a college professor who wears bow ties. I buy his snacks and painkillers and head back outside, and he is telling a guy at the red box video kiosk next to our car that his urologist said he had the best kind of figure for the procedure because his anatomy is very straight and uniform. I took him home quickly, gave him his snacks and let him sleep it off. He woke up hours later covered in candy wrappers with orange Dorito fingers and asked, "What happened?" That was 13 years ago and it's still the best story ever. My mom woke up from dental surgery and, when we were leaving the surgeon's office, he gave her a goodie bag with floss and a toothbrush and stuff. The whole way home, she kept asking if she could eat the candy that the dentist gave her. Every time I told her there was no candy, she looked so heartbroken, like a little kid when their goldfish dies or something. Then we stopped at CVS on the way home and she wandered off. I found her in the candy aisle holding a giant bag of fun-sized candy. When I told her to put it back on the shelf, she dropped it on the floor and galloped away laughing at me. I wasn't an anesthesiologist, but a story from my mom about me, while I was under. I had a double jaw surgery scheduled for April 21, 2016. The procedure was fine. I remember waking up halfway through it and getting more anesthesia. After the surgery ended, they put me into the hospital room to let the drugs wear off of me. I don't remember much of this time, so this comes from my mom, but she was sitting in the room with me, watching the news on the TV. I wake up and I'm quiet for a little bit before I start sobbing. My mom thinks it's because my mouth hurts. My mouth is wired shut so I actively can't correct her with words, and have to try and write out, on paper, what I'm crying about. The news was broadcasting about Prince's death, and I was hysterical over the fact that I apparently killed Prince and that I had to turn myself in. I had my wisdom teeth out. When I woke up, I was so excited to get my now extracted teeth and keep them as a souvenir. The nurse said I couldn't. She wheeled me out to the front door where my wife was waiting to load me into the car. She saw my disappointed face and asked, "What's wrong, honey?" I turned and pointed to the nurse and said through my gauze-stuffed mouth, "This butthole won't let me keep my teeth." My stunned wife apologized, and the nurse explained that it's fine, but they were a biohazard. To which I replied incredulously, "They were in my mouth an hour ago." I was part of an operating theater team. There was a girl in her late 20s like me and we had a good laugh when I went to bring her down to the OR from the ward. I think I might have brought her into the procedure room too, but at that point, the doctors would have been talking to her. Afterward, when she was in the recovery room, she was just after waking up, so I went to check on her. She smiled at me and screamed, "Hey Nardinsky, check it out. How big is my dong now? Is it huge?" And then just kind of went back to sleep while I held my laughs till I got to a less public place. The fun thing about anesthesia and post-op is while you're still high as a kite, there's a decent chance you'll have some idea of what you were saying. The next day I was on the same ward collecting another person across from her, so I decided to say hi. She was sitting with her mum, so I just asked how she was feeling, etc., and then asked if she remembered what she had said to me in the recovery room. The girl turned bright red and just started laughing at that point. My aunt was rushed to the hospital for an abnormal heart rate. It wasn't a heart attack or stroke, but her heart was going at like 200 beats per minute or whatever it was. They had to put her under so they could shock her heart back to normal. As they were taking her under, the doctor said something like, "Okay, in it goes," and she immediately quipped with, "That's what she said." All the doctors and nurses busted a gut laughing and told my uncle when he got there. He just shrugged and said, "That's my wife for ya." I woke up from gallbladder surgery confused as to why my mom wasn't there. I was 18 and looking for my mom. The nurse informed me I had cussed out my entire family and they sent them home and put me on a no-visitor list, only for me to wake up at 2 a.m. with no memory, making them call my mom back. Another time I woke up and made horrifically inappropriate jokes. I told the nurse she was pissing me off because I didn't like the automatic blood pressure cuff. Another time I refused to listen to follow-up orders until I had a chicken sandwich. My negotiations were not met. I'm a real treat after anesthesia, but I get a lot of this done at the office my mom works at so she can warn them. I had a guy, nefarious character, heavy drug use history, who got a bunch of ketamine, probably too much, in recovery from one of the other docs to help with severe pain after his abscess drainage. I was asked to check on him in an hour as the other doc had left for the evening. Went over and saw him drooling on himself but otherwise fine, so I left and came back an hour later. First thing he says to me is, "Why did you do that to me?" I asked him what he meant and he said, "You don't understand, I lived another man's life in there." I apologized and asked him, "How long do you think you were in there?" For reference, it had been something like an hour and a half or 2 hours since his trip began. I don't know, maybe 30 years. I was speechless. I apologized again, made sure he knew he was safe, made sure he wasn't hurting, and made damn sure he knew it wasn't me that did it to him. This guy I was dating asked me to take him to get his wisdom teeth removed. He told me that anesthesia doesn't affect him a lot and we were supposed to go on a road trip the next day. So anyway, he gets wheeled out of the dentist by an old nurse. I'm behind the driver's seat and I see him smacking his lips looking up at the sky. She opens my car door and he said, "I love her, I love her." He then proceeded to ask me to marry him several times. He tried to pull out his gauze and I told him stop and he said, "Man, this bitch is bossy." Then he wanted a milkshake. I would suggest a place and he would scream no. Finally we agree on a place and he tells me he'll give me directions. I drive for 15 minutes before I ask him what we're doing and he said he has no idea. We're in the drive-thru and he says, "I have something for you." I swear I thought he had bought me a ring the way he had been proposing for last hour. It was his newly extracted teeth. They let me keep them. I want you to have them. He lived on base at the time and was yelling at the gate while they checked his ID for them to hurry up. I finally get him to his room, in bed. He's happily eating his milkshake with a spoon. His mouth was a mess of blood and milkshake. He asked me for a kiss. I gave him a peck. We're married now. My husband had knee surgery, and when he woke up, he half yelled, half whispered apple juice. So the nurse gave him several small cups full. He grinned like a toddler and said apple juice, then immediately flopped back and went to sleep for 10 minutes. Then he woke up again, gasping that he couldn't breathe. His mom, who I had met maybe 1 or 2 times at this point, went up to the foot of his bed to grab a nurse in the doorway. But he bolted upright and projectile vomited pure apple juice into her face, body, the wall, the door, and the hallway. I have never seen anything like it in my entire life. His mom stood there soaked in juice vomit, and he just rubbed his eyes and said, I feel better. Then he went back to sleep for another 2 hours. I'm an anesthesiologist. The best story was a 40-some-year-old woman for appendectomy, said while I'm giving the propofol to induce anesthesia. She said, I don't remember it tasting like that before, slurred. I said, what does it taste like? Since propofol doesn't usually elicit a taste reaction. She almost yelled D's nuts, and was promptly under anesthesia thereafter. There have been other stories, but this one has the entire staff rolling laughing for minutes after she was under. Anesthesiologist here. For better or for worse, I'm a big Green Bay Packers fan, so I wear a scrub cap with the Packers name and colors on it. I was doing a pre-op evaluation on a kid who was a big New Orleans Saints fan. When I walked into the room, his first words to me were Packers suck. I laughed and continued to prepare him and his family for his redo open heart surgery procedure. Fast forward to surgery a couple days later, and his mom had come back to the OR as he was going to sleep. Given the fact this was a 3 or 4 time redo stenotomy, going into the chest again, he had a higher risk of major complications from the surgery. I started to push some medication to have him go to sleep while his mom was holding his hand. As he drifted off, he said, wait, I have to tell my mom something. She got emotional saying how much she loved him, and we were all waiting to hear what he had to say so urgently. I paused giving him the medication, but he was already well on his way to being under. As he drifted off to sleep, he said, Packers suck. That kid did great, I hope he is doing well. I had an ovarian cyst removed a year ago and woke up from the anesthesia saying hand please, and making grabby hands with both my hands until the nurses finally came over and held my hands for about 5 minutes while I just smiled and tried to go back to sleep. I hadn't done that in a decade. I used to do it to my dad all the time as a kid to express that I wanted to hold his hand while I slept.
Somebody replied.
I recently had surgery for endometriosis, and I did the exact same thing. The nurses held my hand nicely before setting it back on the bed once I calmed down. Apparently this lasted for 15 to 20 minutes until I realized they had tucked the stuffed animal I brought under my arm and that I could hold it instead. They put bandages on it in the same place I had them. I'm 24, but because of COVID I had to be alone and a stuffed animal was the best I could do. That stuffed rabbit is now my best friend. One summer I was home from college and my dad needed me to pick him up after his very first colonoscopy. He was nervous so I got there early. The nurse called me back and asked me to help wake him up, as they were having some trouble. I go back and am making small talk. Oh Dad, you've got those cool booties on. He raised his head a little bit to look at them then yelled, booty call. He is a Presbyterian pastor. A moment I will treasure forever. My boyfriend at the time had just gotten his wisdom teeth removed, and on the ride home, with his mouth full of gauze, he got a call on his cell phone. He answered it and just started talking away. Whoever it was on the other side could not possibly understand a word he was saying with all the gauze in his mouth. But man, he had a lot to talk about, and they apparently didn't hang up. After about 5 minutes of this unintelligible phone conversation, he looked at me and said, "It's a robot," and gave me the phone. I put it to my ear, and the whole time it had been the Algreen's Pharmacy automated notice, simply stating his prescription was ready for pickup, playing on repeat. probably for the best. I have no recollection of this, but according to my mom, when she met me in the recovery room after my wisdom tooth extraction, I was very eager to tell her something, but my mouth was full of gauze. So they gave me a pen and I wrote something on the surgical bib. Hours later, when I was back in reality, she asked me, "What was with the meow meows, my son?" I had no idea what she was talking about, so she showed me the bib. It said, "Meow meow meow meow. Meow 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 meow. Meow 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 meow." I hope you enjoyed these stories. Subscribe to have a story from an actual anesthesiologist rather than a friend or relative. Hit like if you enjoyed my content, or hit the recommended box to see more of my daily videos.